to the Mental Breakdown. I'm Dr. Berney Wilkinson, and today's question comes from DIAN, who wrote, "My son was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and as I listened to the doctor talking about his symptoms, I realized that I probably have ADHD as well. Specifically, I have a really hard time managing my schedule and keeping myself organized. I have a busy life, but tend to miss deadlines and obligations. What kind of strategies can I use to help me with this?" Well, Diane, that's a great question. I'm going to begin this discussion talking about ADHD in general. Now, ADHD is what we call a disorder of executive function. Executive functions are those cognitive processes that allow us to not only get ourselves organized, but to inhibit impulses, to manage our emotions and our frustrations. It helps with something called working memory so that we can hold information in our mind. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. Executive functions help us with self-monitoring, helps us to know what we should pay attention to and what we should sort of ignore and not focus on while we're trying to focus on something else. So we see this a lot of times in children who have ADHD because they have a hard time focusing on what the teacher's saying because they're distracted by someone sharpening their pencil or sort of that stereotypical someone's or somebody's outside the window or the butterfly flying outside the window that's keeping the child's attention. So because it's a disorder of executive function, a lot of people with ADHD have a really difficult time with organization and planning. And so let's talk a little bit or spend a little bit of time talking about what that means for you. Well, the first thing that's required for organization and planning really is attention. And that when we think about ADHD, certainly attention is a challenge that people with ADHD have, but individuals with difficulty organizing and planning their schedules and their days tend to have problems with attention as well. The reason that attention is so important with organization is because of details. So often we miss details, we forget particular things that we have to do. So, for example, if you're trying to plan your afternoon and you're not attending to some of those details, you may overcommit yourself or you may forget something that you're supposed to do. And attention is one of those cognitive skills that help us make sure that we get some of those little details. Now, the second skill that's really important for organizing and planning is anticipation. Now, that's not really one of the executive functions that we were talking about a minute ago, but anticipation is the ability to predict or to understand what could be coming next. And obviously, this is really important with organization and planning because when we can anticipate what's to come, then we can prepare for it and we can be ready. Many individuals who have a hard time with organization and planning, when things come up, many times they're just taken completely by surprise. They weren't expecting it at all. And so it throws their entire organization or their entire plan out of kilter, and they are messed up for the rest of the day or it just really affects them in a negative way. So anticipation is a skill that we have to build here as well. Now, the third thing is working memory. And I mentioned working memory a moment ago, but working memory is the ability to hold information in your head, manipulate it a little bit, kind of do something with it, work with it, as the name suggests, and then produce a different outcome. So sort of the classic example is, when we think of short-term memory is if somebody gives you their telephone number, your ability to remember their telephone number long enough to put it in your phone. Well, working memory would be if I gave you someone's telephone number, but then asked you to repeat it back to me backward in reverse order. That's working memory. So you're holding that information in your short-term memory, but then you're doing something with it. And for people with difficulty organizing and planning, that's one of the challenges that they have because, like the issue with anticipation and attention, being able to hold some of this information in your short-term memory while adjusting it and thinking, well, should I do this first or should I do that first or should I go in this direction or that direction? Being able to problem solve with that information in your mind is somewhat challenging for people with these kinds of problems. Now, the fourth issue that we have to address here is what I'm going to call concept formation. And what I mean by that, and that's especially important with organization, concept formation is what allows us to understand underlying similarities. When we take a concept like, one of the examples that we're going to use in a few minutes when I talk about ways to help improve your organization, one of the ideas is to use your grocery list. Well, concept formation is going to be your ability to look at information and understand what kinds of things go together, what kinds of things fall within the same concept, and so that you can form these concepts to keep yourself organized and structured. Many people will, with difficulties with concept formation, they may try to create a list for the grocery store, and if they follow the list, item 1 through item 10, they find themselves going back and forth all over the grocery store, when if they would have just been able to sort of structure those concepts a little bit and organize it a little bit better, they could have gotten all of the dairy products at the same time, all of the bread products at the same time, and so on. So concept formation is another thing that's really important, and again, we're going to address that in just a moment with one of the recommendations I'm going to make for you. The fifth thing here is what I'm going to call cognitive flexibility, and that is, many people with ADHD do what we call shifting. They shift from one thought to another thought, one idea to another idea. And while that kind of flexibility is good at times, there are other times when it creates a problem, because as you're trying to organize yourself, you're trying to plan your day, when we're distracted, that over flexibility, if you will, creates a problem, because it gets us off track. It distracts you or takes you away from the mission that you have at the time. So we need to, in some people with ADHD and these kinds of problems, we need to tighten up that flexibility just a little bit, so that they don't find themselves not being able to create a plan or to keep themselves organized simply because of that distraction and that cognitive shifting. But the other side that flexibility comes in is when we're too rigid, too inflexible, and we need to be able to adjust ourselves according to things that are happening in our environment. So, when you do organize your life and your schedule, being flexible enough to adjust, but then get back to what you need to do. So, for example, of course, if you have a plan for the day and you're going to go from point A to point B to point C, if something comes up and you need to make a detour sometime between point B and point C, that you'd be able to do that flexibly, but then get back on track so that you can finish out your plan for the day. The last is self-monitoring. And self-monitoring is your ability to really just kind of sit back and see how you're doing. Oftentimes we fail to use self-monitoring because we just go with the flow, and we are focused more on what we're doing than how well we're doing it, or whether we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. In kids, we create situations where they self-monitor by evaluating what they're doing at any particular time, or they have to do an assessment of how on task they are or how off task they are, and those kinds of things. In adults, so it's similar in that we need to create a situation where you have some checks to look back and say, hey, am I getting done what I need to get done? Am I doing what I need to be doing? And if you're not, again, that cognitive flexibility to get back on track and get back to where you need to be. Now, when we think about improving organization, there's a few strategies that I like to recommend to people to use. And the first is quite simply using a notebook. Back before some of the technology that we have today, I was certainly one who would go around with a little spiral-bound pocket notebook in my pocket with a small pencil, just so that I could keep track of things that I need to do. So if I was somewhere and I figured out that I needed to do something or that I needed to accomplish something, I would pull out my notebook and I would write it down, and I would make sure that everything on my to-do list for the day was in the notebook and, of course, checked off by the end of the day. That's a very almost archaic now way of dealing with organization, but at the same time, it's very effective because it's right in your pocket, and you can. It doesn't really require any technology, doesn't require any special skill or anything like that. All you have to do is be able to jot down the activity that you need to deal with and go from there. Now, the second, of course, is the use of technology. There's lots of different organizing and personal assistant types of apps out there, whether it's Google Now, which is an app that's on both iOS and Windows-based phones. Siri, of course, is on Apple-based, and Wunderlist, and there's many others. But these types of personal assistant types of apps do a really nice job of helping you keep yourself organized. So you can just talk into your phone and say, hey, remind me that I have to go to the bank, at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Or when I get to the office, remind me that I need to make a telephone call. And these kinds of apps that we have now will be able to take that information, and when you're in that situation or at the time that you indicate, it will do that for you. There's lots of other apps as it relates to keeping whether it's your grocery list or other obligations and things that you have to do. There's just so many apps out there, and I would just encourage you to do even just a Google search and just organizing. What are the best organization apps out there, and you'll get plenty of lists from different people's perspectives, and then just explore them, see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. The third strategy is practice, of course. And practicing, what I mean by practicing is using very specific activities to try and build your skills. And the example I use, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is the grocery list. When you are making your list for the grocery store, first of all, make sure you make a list for the grocery store. If you're trying to build your organization skills and planning skills, you need to go ahead and start making lists. That's what your notebook is for from the first one, and of course that's what the apps are for that I mentioned a moment ago as well. But start making lists. Start getting yourself organized by being routine in the use of making lists. And when you practice with your grocery list, get listed down everything that you need from the grocery store, and then sit down with that list and organize it. Okay, most of us know the grocery store pretty well, the layout of the grocery store pretty well. And so you can write down and keep tabs of, okay, so all of the dairy products go together, all of the freezer items go together, all of the meat items go together, and so on, so that when you go to the grocery store, as you go through each section of the grocery store, that part of the list is all grouped together. Again, that's where that concept formation comes into play, and that's good planning and organizing. And using, even though it's maybe a silly example, it's a really useful way to learn how to organize yourself. I encourage parents often to do this with their ADHD child. Have your ADHD child sit with you and help you organize your grocery list so that they too can learn how to use this skill, especially when it's an area that they're having a difficult time with. The fourth strategy is figuring out a way to build this into your routine. So for some people, sitting down at night just before they go to bed and thinking about all that they have to do the next day, it helps a lot to sit down and write out that agenda for the day, or the to-do list for the next day. Other people prefer to do it in the morning, where they sit down, getting your day ready, maybe sitting down with your first cup of coffee and saying, what do I have to get done today, and then making a list. But build it into your routine. If you have to make a run out to the store, again, making a list, creating a routine that allows you to organize your activities and then work to stick with it. The final strategy is, just asking for help. Sometimes we need help. For some people, the practical examples and the building it into your routine examples that I use are very, very straightforward, and they're able to do that. Other people admittedly have a difficult time with that. And so ask your significant other to help you get organized. Ask your significant other to put things together so that you have a good itinerary or a good plan for the day. when we are trying to organize our personal space, our rooms and offices and things like that, it's really good to get somebody to help you so that you don't get overwhelmed and you can organize it in a way that makes sense, especially for people who have difficulties with organization. Getting that assistance is going to help you organize it in a way that not only makes sense, but is effective for you now and as you move forward. So, all right, Diane, I hope that helped. That is the different strategies for helping with organization. And I would love to hear from you or anybody else as you have a chance to try some of those strategies. So until next time, I'm Dr. Berney, and forget to be afraid.